Howdy friends, I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. And on today's episode, we're going to look forward to UFC. It's going on this weekend in Russia. We're going to take a look at the co-main and main event on that one. We're going to also take a look at who should be the next contender for Israel Adesanya, now that it looks like Paulo Costa has injured his bicep and won't be the next contender for Israel. But we're going to start today's episode by looking at the fallout from UFC 244 this past weekend and what should be next for some of the big winners and a couple of the losers from that event. UFC 244 was such an incredible event, and there were so many great winners and so many great fights, interesting prospects going forward. We're just going to briefly look at some of these guys. We're going to go a little bit deeper on a couple of them, but on some of them we're going to be really brief, so that way we can fit in as many different type of analysis as possible. So the first guy I want to talk about is Edmen Shahbazyan. He's 21 years old. This kid looks like he might be primed to break the Jon Jones 23-year-old youngest champion record at this point. He is phenomenal. He just went out there and dominated Brad Tavares, who has been a perennial top 15 to top 10 contender in the middleweight division for years now. Brad Tavares is a guy that went 5 full rounds with the champion, Israel Adesanya, who looks like an absolute world beater. Tavares went 5 rounds with Israel. So just think about that. Edmen Shahbazyan went out there and knocked him out viciously, quickly. So the future's extremely bright for Edmen. And I think the next thing that we should see for him should be another, Brad Tavares was a perfect opponent because we know how good Brad Tavares is. So if you can dominate Brad Tavares, we know that you're a top 10 commodity. So let's get him a guy who's a borderline top 5 guy, perennial contender, a type of guy a guy who's a proven commodity in the middleweight division. I'm thinking Jack Hermansson. I'm thinking that's a great fight. Maybe Kelvin Gastelum after this recent loss for Gastelum. I like Gastelum a little bit less than Hermansson. But maybe we give this 21-year-old kid one of those guys, one of those top 5 guys who is a perennial contender, a known commodity, known top 5 quality commodity in the middleweight division. See if this Shahbazyan kid can beat that. If he blows the doors off of Hermansson or Gastelum, you give him a title shot right away, and this kid could be the future of the sport. Now let's talk about Cory Anderson a little bit. Cory Anderson is a guy who has been the squeaky wheel lately. He has been trying to get the grease. Everybody's been saying, well, you know what, Cory, you need to put on a good performance. Who cares that you've won 3 in a row? They're all by decision. You need to put on a good performance over a guy that we care about, and then we will give you credit. Well, guess what? Cory Anderson went out there and KO'd Johnny Walker, a guy who had all the hype in the world. People were touting him. If he beats Cory Anderson, he could be the next contender, leapfrogging over Dom Reyes, who, is the true rightful next contender for Jon Jones, right? And then Anderson goes out there and smokes Walker in the first round. Anderson finally puts himself on the map, stamps with exclamation mark on the victory with the style points in which he got the victory, right? So Anderson, what's next for him? Should he get the title shot? I don't think so. I still think Dominic Reyes is the rightful next contender for Jon Jones, but Anderson now, in my opinion, is one away without a doubt. You just can't give it to Anderson because Johnny Walker was ranked number 11. He was a highly touted prospect coming into that, but Johnny Walker didn't have the type of a signature win to where beating Johnny Walker earns you a title shot. He was the hot prospect, but he was the number 11 guy who didn't have a signature win yet. So Anderson beating him doesn't put him straight into title contention. But I do love the Anthony Smith fight next for Cory Anderson. Anthony Smith and Cory Anderson right now are both actually really low-key good shit talkers. You know what I mean? They're both out there. They know how to make the rounds in the media. They're both, not media afraid. They're both willing to be the squeaky wheels right now. And that's why Anthony Smith got the grease, and that's what Cory Anderson's trying to do right now to get the grease. So those two, Anthony Smith called Cory out after the fight. There's a bit of a heat there. There's a bit of a rivalry there. These guys are gonna talk shit back and forth to one another if you pit them up against each other. Anthony Smith is one of the few guys that's still ranked ahead of Cory Anderson. He's a guy who has competed against John Jones recently. Since competing against John Jones, has a win over Gustafsson. So a win over Anthony Smith, Cory Anderson would absolutely deserve a title shot. And on Anthony Smith's part, a win over Cory Anderson, and Anthony Smith is probably at that point only one away from a title shot. So, both fighters, I would assume, would want this fight. It makes sense for both guys. Early 2020 is when Anthony Smith wants to return. It makes all the sense in the world. And whoever wins that fight, if Cory Anderson wins that fight, he could definitely and should definitely be the next contender for John Jones, which is ultimately what Anderson's been going after. The Motown Phenom is back, baby. Kevin Lee came back this weekend with a huge win over Gregor Gillespie that on paper it seemed like a bit of a scary fight, a bit of a stupid fight for Kevin Lee to take on. But Kevin showed that, his grappling is as elite as anybody in the division, except maybe Khabib. But Kevin Lee thinks that his grappling's better than Khabib. And, if he can keep the fight standing, that he can knock out these elite level grapplers like a Gregor Gillespie. And maybe Firas Zahabi is the missing link that Kevin Lee really needed. And that's why he had this bit of a career drought here before his most recent outing. Think about it. Firas Zahabi obviously was GSP's head trainer. Kevin Lee fights in a similar way to GSP. In that he's well-rounded, he's got an elite grappling base. GSP developed an elite grappling base, but still has an elite grappling base, but is well-rounded to where, he'll defeat you where you're weakest, rather than just focus on his strengths. He'll focus on where your weakness is and try to exploit the weakness. So what's next for Kevin Lee? Huge win for him. I love that he did go back in the rankings a little bit in terms of the opponent that he took on, compared to Darren Till, who's just trying to get right back up to the title contention after his little bit of a skid and, changing weight classes and whatnot. And I think it's smart to, when you're a young guy like a Kevin Lee or Darren Till, to go back in the rankings and try to rework your way up and skill build and confidence build along the way. So that way when you get back to the top, you're a new and improved version of yourself that has the best chance at success possible, right? So what should be next for Kevin Lee? Islam Makhachev is the simple answer. That is the fight that absolutely should be next. It's another brilliant fight for Lee in that he can go back down in the rankings and gain momentum off of a lower ranked guy. And before he catapults himself back up into the, top 5-6 murderers row at lightweight, if he gets a big win over Islam Makhachev, who is, if you don't know, close friends and close training partners with Khabib, has a kind of a similar high, heavy grappling style to Khabib. Let's say Kevin Lee goes out there and, is able to stuff the takedown like he was against Gillespie, which, after seeing his performance against Gillespie, I'm feeling pretty confident about Lee's chances against Makhachev. So let's say he goes out there and can stuff Makhachev's takedowns and then can use his own striking to win that bout. Then afterwards, he can call out Khabib. You have a grudge match scenario, a rivalry scenario. They already have a bit of a rivalry, Kevin Lee and Khabib, because Kevin Lee's just been poking at him over the years, just continuously poking at him. So by going out and taking out a sort of mentee of Khabib's in Islam Makhachev, who has a similar style to Khabib, I think that Kevin Lee could drum up a lot of interest for a Khabib potential fight. And he could put himself in a position then where he's only maybe one away and, could put himself in a position where Khabib is interested in the fight, which is a huge factor in getting, a title shot, particularly against a star like Khabib is a star right now in the UFC, is by having the champion's interest. And then the promotion will also be interested, so you can have all three parties interested. The Islam Makhachev fight is just the fight that makes the most sense for Kevin Lee next. And I think it's a winnable fight, and I think it can propel Kevin Lee into a great future in the lightweight division. Now, I talked about this next matchup a lot in my last episode when I was discussing what should be next for Demian Maia. And we're going to look at what should be next for Wonderboy, and I'm going to say it's Demian Maia. Last week I was saying, win or lose, Wonderboy versus Demian Maia makes sense, and it still does. It still makes sense. Wonderboy won this past weekend, and to be honest, it makes even more sense with a Wonderboy victory than if Wonderboy were to have lost, right? Wonderboy is still actually ranked lower than Demian Maia. Amazingly enough, Demian Maia, because of his win over Askren, he's on I believe a 3-fight win streak, great win streak. And these guys have both been in the division at the highest level of the welterweight division for so many years, simultaneously. And they're both just these insane specialists that are just nightmares for anybody to beat. They're so good at their specific thing that nobody with a well-rounded game, hardly anybody, I should say, with a well-rounded game can defeat either of these guys, right? They've both challenged for the welterweight title, but they've somehow never competed against one another. Wonderboy, maybe the best kickboxing pure specialist, karate kickboxing specialist in the UFC. Demian Maia, the best Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist in the UFC, perhaps. Imagine these two going head-to-head, style versus style. It's almost like a throwback fight. You have the poster, you could do it as an ESPN main event. The countdown would be incredible. With these guys, they're both such great sportsmen and such great athletes and competitors. Imagine the countdown would be incredible. The poster would be incredible. Them with each of their respective black belts in their respective gis from their respective martial arts disciplines. I mean, it's just, this is like a special fight. It's like the Maia versus the Askren. Like watching Maia, who's just one of the true great remaining specialists, in watching these specialist versus specialist matchups, it's special. I hate to say that after using the word specialist so many times, but it's something incredible to witness. And that's got to be the next fight. It makes sense. They're 6 and 8 in the rankings. They're both coming off of big wins. It's time. They haven't fought each other yet. It's time for them to fight now. That would be an incredible ESPN main event. I think it's got to be a 5-round fight as well. So that's why I say ESPN main event, not a pay-per-view co-main. That's got to be a 5-round fight with those types of specialists, just like the Maia versus Askren one. You have to let these specialists go over time, to see whose style is the best. This is a throwback fight. It would just be incredible. It's one of the fights, it would be top 10 fights that I have to see in 2020. What about Darren Till? Darren Till this past weekend, in many ways, was the biggest winner, right? With the BMF title ending somewhat controversially. I don't really think it was controversial. I think Jorge was beating the shit out of Diaz and didn't look like he was really getting that tired. But I digress. It's very arguable that Till, an unranked guy making his debut in a weight class, taking out, Kelvin was number 3 or number 4 going into that fight. So taking out a guy that was ranked that highly, when you're unranked making your debut in the weight class, can be argued that Till had the biggest win this weekend, right? But I don't want to see Till fight somebody ranked ahead of him now. It shoots him all the way up. I believe he's ranked 5 now. The guys ranked ahead of him are as follows. Where are they? You have Romero. You have Costa, who is injured, supposed to be taking on Adesanya, but is injured, so he's out. So he's out of it. You have Cannonier, who, if Costa's out of it, I'm going to get into this later, but Cannonier has to be the guy to fight him. And then you've got like Whitaker. Whitaker versus Gastelum makes a ton of sense, in my opinion. They were supposed to fight before. You've already got the heat. They're coming off of losses. That fight makes a lot of sense to me. So take Whitaker out of it. I don't think he should fight any of those guys. Like Costa, Cannonier, Whitaker, those guys all don't make sense because Costa's injured. Cannonier should be next for Adesanya. Whitaker, for his Gastelum. Do you really want to see Till versus Romero? Like, for Till's second fight in a new weight class after Till's 2 previous fights before this Gastelum fight, don't forget, he was finished in both of them. And then in this Gastelum fight, he won that fight. He clearly won, in my opinion, but it was a close fight. It was a close 3-round fight where he kind of played it safe against Gastelum. We just don't need to see because you beat Romero and then it's title shot. We don't need to see them fast track Till again. We saw what happened when you fast track Till. Till is a young guy. He needs to follow the Kevin Lee blueprint now. Stop trying to cut in line just because, and I get it, because with Kevin Lee and Darren Till, they're similar. They're young, they have championship potential, and they're marketable. So the UFC's trying to cut them in line, and then the UFC offers them these great opportunities. And if you're a guy and you get offered a great opportunity, what are you going to say? No? Of course you're going to take a great opportunity. So you take it, but it might not be as good for your long-term, your longevity, your long-term career outlook. It might be better to go back in the rankings a little bit, fight a Gregor Gillespie like Kevin Lee just did, and slowly work your way back up. Meanwhile, confidence build, skill build, muscle build. If you're Darren Till, you're going up in weight class. Till looked good, but he could have looked even beefier. He could have been more ripped. He could have been a little bit bigger and stronger. I think he can still grow into the weight class a little bit more. So a perfect opponent for Till, perfect opponent, is Uriah Hall. I forget where he's ranked exactly, but he's ranked around 10th, somewhere around there. Hall's on a win streak right now. He's at least won 3 of his last 4. I think he's in his only loss in that stretch is to Costa. I think 2 fights ago was to Costa. So he's not on like a big win streak, but he does have momentum right now. I think he is actually on a 2-fight win streak. So it doesn't really matter. He's won 3 of his last 4. He had a nice win against Shoeface in Vancouver there recently. He's a striking style, fun, entertaining kickboxing highlight reel style, who's going to oblige Darren Till in the type of matchup that the fans want to see, that Darren Till wants to engage in. It's just a win-win-win. It would be an entertaining fight. You give Hall a chance to. Hall is a guy who's been fighting the best in the world in week in and week out, year in and year out for years now, and he's hung around at the top. So you give Hall a chance to make an honest shot at climbing the rankings again, which is fair to Hall. And then you're also giving Till a chance to slowly work his way up the middleweight rankings. You give him Hall, he wins that, then you can give him, one of these top 5 guys, and then give him a title shot, for God's sakes. Like, if you really want to, I'm just saying, give him one more fight as like a buffer for him to grow into the weight class. A fight with Uriah would be fun. It would be winnable. And, particularly after seeing how well Till just performed against Gastelum, I would say it's very winnable. It's also losable, but it's definitely winnable. And it would just be great for all parties involved. Last but not least, the baddest motherfucker in the game, Jorge Masvidal. What should be next for him? The obvious answer is a title shot, right? Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington are fighting next month for the welterweight belt. And, the easy, obvious, cookie-cutter answer, and it might be the right answer, is a title shot for Jorge Masvidal next. Now, I think if Colby Covington wins the belt from Kamaru, then you have to do the title shot next. That's 1,000,000% the fight to do. The bad blood, the best friends falling out storyline between Jorge and Colby, the way that Colby and Jorge would be able to sell that fight. Everything about that fight is a must make. I feel like we have to see that fight one way or another eventually. So if Colby wins, and I think Colby has a real chance. That fight against him and Kamaru is like a 50-50 in my mind. So if Colby wins, then him and Masvidal is 1,000,000,000% the fight to make. That is like one of the most important fights the UFC would have to make. But if Kamaru wins, I'm interested in maybe some other options for Masvidal. For example, like let's keep this BMF thing going maybe a little bit. I originally didn't want to keep the BMF thing going, and I don't want them to keep it going if it's like pandering or they're just doing whatever to keep it alive, and it doesn't still really feel like a BMF title. Like Jorge and Nate was a special occasion. It was a special moment, and it's going to be almost impossible to try to recreate circumstances like that. But here's one person who could challenge for the BMF title that would be very interesting. Justin Gaethje. the proclaimed most violent man in mixed martial arts, could go up to 170 pounds. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Justin Gaethje going up, not Jorge going down or them meeting in the middle. Justin going up and challenging, saying, I'm the baddest motherfucker in the game, Jorge. And this is contingent on, because right now the Conor McGregor sweepstakes looks like it's between Cowboy and Gaethje, and it looks like it's leaning Cowboy's way. So if it is leaning Cowboy's way and Conor does fight Cowboy, then Gaethje is stuck in a position where it's like there's nobody really for him to fight at 55. Like, he should be the next in line for a title, but Tony's already there, the most overqualified number one contender in the history of the sport. So Gaethje's kind of stuck in a spot where there's nobody that really makes sense for him left at lightweight. What's he going to fight, Dan Hooker? Like, and just give Dan Hooker the chance to take his spot? Like, there's no way for Gaethje to get any higher in the lightweight division. So going up and taking on Jorge Masvidal for the BMF title, maybe getting some pay-per-view points and some big money, that might make a lot of sense. And then if in this fictional world, Conor and Cowboy are also fighting, the winner of Conor and Cowboy, that sounds like a great fight to fight the winner of Gaethje and Masvidal for the BMF title a third time. So like, I was originally a little bit skeptical and hesitant of wanting to do more BMF titles. Like, I figured maybe once in a blue moon, maybe if the right exact perfect fight like the Diaz-Masvidal was just the moons and stars all aligned for that one. But I think you could keep this magic going with a Gaethje-Masvidal, and then the winner of Gaethje-Masvidal taking on the winner of a Cowboy and Conor. You could keep this BMF title going for a little while with those permutations. And I just love that Masvidal kind of broke the mold of the standard game. You know, with the help of Nate Diaz laid a lot of this groundwork down. But Masvidal is a star now. He's getting pay-per-view points, and he's in a position now where he can headline main event pay-per-view cards without a real belt. And I kind of want to see him continue to work outside of the mainstream, ladder to the belt system, and continue to headline pay-per-views and sort of break the mold of the game and reinvent the way that MMA and the UFC promotes. So if Kamaru wins, I would prefer to see Masvidal stay outside the system and do these interesting, fun fights that are going to be stylistically and fan friendly, rather than go and fight on the mainstream track like every other person does. Because then as he does that, then he's making that track, like the way that Conor made being a double champ a reality in the UFC, and then a bunch of other people have done it since. If Jorge Masvidal can make being a pay-per-view main eventer without having an actual title, and like, hey, we can just do fun fights that stylistically are going to entertain and engage the fan base, then, Jorge's breaking the game. So I would prefer to see him on that track. Now, if it's Colby, that's just too juicy of a fight to avoid. But if it's not Colby, I want to see Jorge just freaking trailblaze his own way through the MMA landscape. Now, it was reported last week that Paulo Costa wouldn't be able to fight Israel Adesanya in the first half of 2020 because he has a bicep injury, is what it's reported as right now. So it looks like Israel is going to have to take on somebody else in the meantime. Now, I know he's pushing for Yoel Romero. I don't think that fight makes any sense. I think that there's only one fight that makes sense, and it makes a ton of sense. None of the other fights even make a little bit sense, and this one fight makes a ton of sense, and that's Jared Cannonier versus Israel Adesanya. Like, every other fight literally makes zero sense, and Cannonier is in a position, it's like Justin Gaethje at lightweight. Justin Gaethje should be the number one contender, but Tony Ferguson is just the most overqualified number one contender you've ever seen. So he's the number one contender, and Gaethje's the number two, but there's nobody for Gaethje to fight, because anybody that he could fight, he's just offering up his position as the number two guy, but he can't gain any ground. And that's exactly where Cannonier is. He's in a clear-cut number 2 position where if he fights anybody, all that he can do is stay the same or go back. But anybody that fights Cannonier has the position to just jump up the ladder to the top. Costa is the clear-cut number 1 contender, hands down. He is a ridiculously overqualified contender, similar to Tony Ferguson, but not to the same degree. But if Costa's out, just like if Tony Ferguson was out, Gaethje would be the next man up. Costa's out, Cannonier has to be the next man up. Let's look at the people who are ranked in the top 5. Cannonier's ranked 4th. The only person in the top 5 ranked behind him is Till at 5. Till should not get the title shot, right? Excuse me. Till should not get the title shot, right? After one victory in middleweight. He has 2 losses before that victory, both by stoppage, right? And then you've got, obviously, Cannonier at 4. He's 3-0 at middleweight. All 3 wins over ranked opponents. All 3 wins by a devastating finish. Very impressive, emphatic fashion. And then ranked ahead of him at 3, Romero. Romero, a guy who is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, if I'm correct. Yeah, 1-3 in his last 4 fights. You know, most recently has a loss as well. 2 losses, I believe. Whitaker and Costa, his last 2 fights, both losses. So he's coming off of 2 losses, giving him a title shot. Does that make sense? No, of course not. And then you've got Whitaker. You've got Costa, obviously, who's the man in question, who's supposed to be out. That's the whole reason we're having this conversation. And then you've got Whitaker, who just got knocked out in the 2nd or 3rd round. Got knocked out very convincingly, very quickly by Adesanya. So the only person that makes sense is Cannonier, and he makes an abundant amount of sense. As I said, 3-0, all exciting finishes, all over ranked opponents. He's surging right now. Nobody else makes sense. His resume is off the charts. He's the only contender for Adesanya if Costa can't go. Looking forward to UFC Russia on Saturday, the co-main event, the biggest mismatch in UFC history maybe. Alexander Volkov is taking on Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy, has basically no professional MMA experience compared to Alexander Volkov, who Volkov started his professional MMA career back in 2009, 10 years ago. And Volkov's only 31, so when he began it 10 years ago, he was only a 21-year-old. It's not like he began his career 10 years ago and he's some old fart now over the hill. He's, just in his prime now, Alexander Volkov, right? He's got 20 KOs in his career. He started his professional career. He's 30-7 in his professional career. He started in 2009. Greg Hardy didn't even start his NFL career, his first athletic professional career, till 2010. Alexander Volkov has been fighting professionally since before Greg Hardy was even in the NFL. Greg Hardy has been training MMA for 3 years. He's been training MMA for 3 freaking years. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Greg Hardy has the most ridiculous athleticism and power in the entire heavyweight division. And with those little gloves on, all you need to do is land one punch to knock somebody out. But Volkov, former Bellator champion, former M1 champion, 6'7", he's going to have the height and the reach on Greg Hardy, which Greg Hardy hasn't really had to face so far in his career. Everybody who hates Greg Hardy is going to want to tune in this weekend because I think he's going to get served up in this one pretty handily. Like I said, he has a puncher's chance. That's for damn sure. And, we wanted to see a step up for Greg Hardy. We were saying, these guys like the Combat Wombat, although the Combat Wombat gave him the goods in the 3rd round on that Inflategate fight in Greg Hardy's most recent outing. But, we wanted to see a step up for Greg Hardy. But when we were saying a step up for Greg Hardy, I was thinking like Todd Duffy, somebody who's also marketable, but outside the top 15 and is a high action style guy who's going to oblige Greg Hardy in a bit of a slugfest, a stylistic matchup that favors Hardy so we can continue to, build this guy. But, it's pretty well documented and a lot of people think that Greg Hardy's a scumbag. So perhaps he'll get served up some nice humble pie and the people that are, cheering for Greg's demise will get to enjoy that. And hopefully for him, this doesn't totally demoralize and derail his career, and he can, go back to outside the top 15 to where he should be and take a couple more years before he gets up to the ranked opponents. Like, he's only been training. He's only been training mixed martial arts since 2016. He's only been training for 3 years. He's only been fighting professionally for 2 years. He's got a long way to go. He shouldn't be fighting literally one of the best heavyweights on earth, a guy who's like 4-1 or 5-1 in the UFC, only fighting ranked opponents. It's just too much too soon for Greg Hardy. And in the main event in UFC Russia this weekend, Zabit Magomedsharipov is taking on Calvin Kattar. And this is a fight where the UFC, it kind of reminds me of Darren Till versus Jorge Masvidal last year in London. Playing the part of Darren Till is Zabit. He's going to be the hometown guy, by far the favorite in the betting book, favorite in terms of fan interest at the event locally. So he's going to be the clear-cut favorite, right, Zabit? And then, playing the Masvidal role is Calvin Kattar, the guy who's coming in as an underdog, a little bit unknown, expected to lose, coming into enemy territory, but has fucking wicked hands and has a real chance to win this fight. Calvin Kattar is one of the most underrated guys in the entire UFC. His run in the featherweight division in the UFC has been outstanding, and a lot of people aren't paying attention to it. A lot of people know about Zabit. Zabit is a guy who people have been excited about him as a prospect ever since he entered the UFC, because he was being so highly touted by his training partners like Frankie Edgar and Eddie Alvarez and his coach Mark Henry. And then he came out and he performs, and he's a really exciting high action fighter who goes for broke in the grappling, goes for broke in the stand up. He can do spinning techniques. He does high energy moves. But those high energy moves can cause Zabit in his gas tank a little bit. And I think in a 5-round fight against a dog like Calvin Kattar, that could be a real problem. And a lot of people think Calvin Kattar is susceptible to the leg kicks because Moicano was able to expose him. Moicano was able to expose him with the leg kicks a little bit. But that was a little while ago. Calvin Kattar's had time to shore up that hole in his game. You don't think he knows that's why he lost that fight? It was a close fight other than that. That one particular weapon that Moicano used so cleverly. You don't think Calvin's figured that out? And then Calvin, he's 5'11". He's so big and long for the weight class. Of course, Zabit is very big and long for the weight class as well. But he's so big and long for the weight class. And you saw against Lamas, who's, granted, not the greatest striker, but, you saw Kattar checking some leg kicks against Lamas. And, Kattar with his long arms and he has phenomenal hand speed, phenomenal knockout power. He could probably throw, he's going to be ready for those leg kicks. He's going to be ready with a big right counter. He's going to be ready to check them. I think he's going to be ready for those leg kicks. And, I'm not saying that Kattar is going to win in this. I just think he's a live dog. I'm not saying this is going to play out just like Till and Masvidal, I'm just saying that the way that the complexion of the fight looks before it's taking place is reminding me of that a lot. And I know that this wasn't necessarily built to be, Zabit's card and Zabit's coming out party. This was supposed to be the co-main event on UFC Boston, but Zabit had to pull out due to injury. But now, because of another injury to Dos Santos, Volkov got moved to the co-main event. Zabit went from co-main at Boston to co-main in Russia to main in Russia. So this is Zabit in the UFC. They're trying to capitalize on this opportunity to explode Zabit up. This is his big coming out opportunity, because if you look, he in the rankings, the only guys that are ranked ahead of him, Aldo, Edgar's dropping to bantamweight. Aldo's dropping to bantamweight to fight Moraes, and both those guys have already lost to the champion Holloway anyways, right? And then you got Ortega, who is going to be fighting TKZ, but in his most recent fight, Ortega lost to the champion Holloway. And then you've got Volkov, who is challenging the champion Holloway. So everybody ranked ahead of Zabit are, have already challenged, are, out of the weight class, or are challenging Holloway. So with a win here, the UFC is setting Zabit up to, get a win here in front of his hometown. He's the favorite in the betting odds. He's going to be the favorite from a crowd fanfare perspective. He's the favorite all around, and this is his big chance to get his title shot. He's a guy that everybody has had circled as a prospect to watch out for. Everybody knows that this guy's a prospect to watch out for. Anybody who is even a little bit of a hardcore MMA fan has been watching this guy for a while, and this is the UFC's grooming opportunity to give him that title shot. Unless if Holloway and Volkov, something weird happens where it's, a close fight and Volkov wins and they give Holloway an immediate rematch, or it's a draw and they got to do an immediate rematch, or, something, there's a weird eye poke and they have to do an immediate rematch. Unless if there's some kind of weird situation where they have to do an immediate rematch there, if Zabit can beat Calvin Kattar, he'll get the title shot, So this is the UFC's trying to push this guy. It's his big opportunity, and we got Calvin Kattar coming in here to play spoiler on Zabit, and I think he's got a decent chance to do it. I'm not saying that I favor him, but this is a lot closer to a 50-50 fight than people are giving it credit for. And man, if Kattar can come out here and steal his momentum, it could be just like what Masvidal did to Till. Kattar comes out here and steals his momentum. Maybe gets a Yair Rodriguez fight, goes out there, bam, smashes Yair just like, Masvidal did to Askren, and then boom, now all of a sudden Kattar's a big star. So this is an intense opportunity for both guys to have a star-making performance, and this high stakes main event is what makes this card worth watching, and it's what I'm really tuning in for on Saturday. All right, so that does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks Mixed Martial Arts. I want to thank you for watching. Please like the video. Please subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Twitter at Empey Talks, and drop a comment below in the YouTube comments. I love responding to those things. And until next time, cheers, friends.